Harms caused by big governments in pre-industrialized Europe. Professor Henry Clark, a political economy professor, undertook extensive research about the economic history of Europe, from the period of the Renaissance in the 1400s in Italy through to the period of the French Revolution. Clark studied the economic elements of oppression that was meted out by the monarchies of Europe in support of the Church. In the period up till the 1500s, most of Europe was ruled by nobles and kings, who were believed to have a divine right to rule. What this meant was that the king was considered a superhuman presented to the world by God to control affairs of the people. This ideology was common in the ancient world. Ancient Egyptians and the Chinese had ideas linking the pharaohs and emperors respectively to the supernatural world. In Europe, the institution that kept this notion going was the Church. The Church imposed various moralistic laws and regulations throughout the continent. People were supposed to think within a certain set of parameters based on religious dogma. They were not to question issues, particularly their nobles and kings. In return, the kings and ruling elite guaranteed the Church's right to control various aspects of the European continent. When Italy moved towards the Renaissance in the 15th century, trade and commerce flourished, and there was a budding industry made up of simple agrarian tools and systems. This caused the people in Italy to develop a fairly strong economy, and the people became more affluent. Sensing that the affluence will lead to moral decay, the Church influenced the nobles of Italy to pass sumptuary laws at various points in Italy in the 1400s. A sumptuary law is a law that restricts excessive personal expenditure in order to prevent extravagance and luxury. The Church demanded a certain degree of frugality in or thriftiness in order to maintain the moral hold they had over Europe. They used various religious dogmas and unscientific methods to justify the limitation of spending on worldly things, which they considered a major step towards sinfulness. This can be juxtaposed by today's big governments that pass sumptuary laws to take money from the rich in order to create a fair society. This is based on dogma and belief, rather than a fair notion of capitalism, which allows everyone to sell and retain the profits for themselves. In critiquing these sumptuary laws applied throughout Europe in the 1400s, a French writer and famous political theorist, Baron de Montesquieu, who lived between 1689 and 1755, argued that a state that sought to restrict the people in order to promote equality would require everybody to live a lower standard of life. This means everyone will have to sacrifice their own desires and restrict their needs and tastes in order to appear frugal in the state. At the end of it all, such a state will save excess money for the patria, or a powerful state authority, who will use the economic power that the people were forced to forego. The patria is in the form of a king or noble, who would live a higher quality of life than his subjects without making the same level of sacrifice and effort as the commoner, who was subjected to a lower standard of living and quality of life. This way, the excesses and extra in the country devolved to the king, who maintained a higher quality of life than everyone else. This is the foundation of the big state, which will always disregard the rights of its citizens and ultimately become tyrannical and harm its own citizens. It's uncommon for kings and nobles to literally enslave their subjects. Almost everyone in such tyrannical kingdoms in medieval Europe was a spy for the king because everyone was the king's slave. This prevented development and progress. The concept of state harms in the eyes of post-medieval scholars was one where the state forced everyone to make sacrifices, survive on less, only to give the best to the king or ruler. This was the basis of how the state got strong and powerful and abused the rights of citizens. The only way out of this was to create a system where the sovereign ruler, like the king or head of state, had powers that were highly limited in favor of the separation of powers. However, this was to be done in two separate levels to guarantee freedom of the citizens. How this is done will be the focus of our next lecture. See you there.